Chapter 7 Drawstrings Part 2 Something just clicked for James. A switch or something went off in his brain at 3 in the morning, and he was writing. Mary still wanted a new song, and James was feeling inspired. He was drunk and he was tired, but he had the idea. His bunk was too small, so he went to the front area of the bus and stayed as quiet as he could. Their driver, Greg, didn't seem too interested in a conversation, so James left him alone after a quick greeting. Sometimes James got sad. He tried not to. He tried to suppress those more negative feelings in favor of something better, whether it be a thrill, adrenaline, happiness, anything that was good. But no matter how much he tried to hide it from people, he got sad. It was hard because he was the happy friend. He was the one who was always smiling or laughing. He was supposed to be there for them. Someone stable and unwavering. And he was. Sometimes. Being on tour wasn't helping things either. He missed his parents. And he missed the consistency of a day-to-day schedule. And he missed his bedroom and his flat and his other friends. He missed things he had never even had before. He was filled with this insatiable longing for life. He wanted to do everything and experience everything at the exact same time. He wanted to be spontaneous and have stability. He wanted to travel all over the world, and he wanted the comfort of a home. They weren't that much farther out from Tampa, so James stayed up for the rest of the time, using the app on his phone to try and get a melody for the song. It wasn't the same as a real instrument, but it was all he had access to on the bus. Peter woke up first, which was probably the most surprising thing to happen on their tour so far. He didn't comment on the darkness under James's eyes, and instead brewed a pot of coffee for the both of them. James didn't mention that he had already had a whole pot to himself. He was going to need more to get through the day. 2 and 6 still? Peter asked. James shook his head. He had changed it recently. 3 and 7 now. Peter shook his head, amused. You have an issue, he said, although he was still making James the coffee in the exact way he asked. Agree to disagree. Were you writing? He asked, sitting down across from him. James, on instinct, shut the notebook. Peter raised an eyebrow. James had never hid something he wrote from them. Usually he showed them almost right away, especially if it was something that he thought was good. All right, Bronx? No. Yeah, sorry. Mary just asked if we could have another song written by Friday, he said. Other than the one you and Remus wrote? He nodded. Yeah, other than that one. Peter was smarter than anybody gave him credit for. It was easy to forget when he only was smart when he wanted to be. James might have been the person everyone went to for advice, but it was really Peter who was the best at it. Again, only when he really wanted to be. James, he said, a bit disappointed. Me? James said, trying to lift his spirits. He took a sip of the coffee and he relished the taste and feeling of it. These are the things you tell us. I am telling you. Beforehand. James pressed his lips together. He knew Peter was right, but everyone was so busy. And this was something he was able to do by himself. Okay. Inevitably, Peter's eyes drifted to the notebook in front of James that was still shut. Peter had never once judged any of them for the songs they had written, and they had this unspoken rule to just not ask if it was obviously personal. They hadn't asked questions when Sirius showed them Matilda, or when Remus plopped the relics to I can't handle change in front of them, and very obviously did not want to talk about it. Still, James had never been the best at writing sadder things. It just wasn't his forte. He didn't like to feel sad or dwell in those kinds of emotions, so writing about them never really occurred to him. It took him a minute to work up to it, and James realized he was shaking a little bit as he opened up the notebook and started flipping to the most recent page. It's just a rough draft, James said, sliding it over to Peter. He scoffed, like he always did whenever anybody was doubting themselves, and read the lyrics. Some of them didn't make sense, James realized, not without some sort of explanation, and he was about to interrupt Peter's reading to tell him this when both of their attention was drawn away. James reached across the table and took the notebook back, unsure of why he was so protective over this one song, but knowing he wasn't ready for anybody else to say it. One at a time. It was Regulus. He was walking out of the back room, his hair mussed, and his shirt rolled up a little bit overnight. He didn't even look in their direction, just going in the bathroom. James's cheeks were burning. He knew that immediately. Seeing Regulus brought back the memory of last night. The simple, accidental touches were seared into James's mind. He needed to get this under control. You're joking, Peter said, reminding James of his presence. He had still been staring at the bathroom door, just sort of waiting. What? Serious as brother? He asked, trying not to laugh. Shit. Wait, no, Peter! It was too late, though. Peter had noticed. He had figured it out, and it was so obvious that James didn't even know what to say to try and cover it up. Prongs, you idiot! He groaned, putting his head down on the table and wishing this was all just a dream. His crush was manageable when it was just him who knew about it. But now it was real. Now it was out in the open, and he was kidding himself by trying to label it something as simple as crush. It was more than that, even if he didn't really know what that meant. At the very least, Peter had enough of a mind not to say anything when Regulus walked back out and made himself a coffee in silence. There was more than enough left in the pot for him, and James watched as he put one cream and two sugar just like last time. Good morning, Regulus, Peter said to him, a smile on his face that was too big for the occasion. Hi, he said, looking between the two of them cautiously. He had fixed his shirt, and James noticed that the bow he had tied last night was still perfectly intact. Excited for Tampa? Regulus, to his credit, did not seem to be too confused by Peter's energy this early in the morning. No. Aren't your friends coming? Yes. Secretly, James was very excited to meet who Regulus's friends were, other than Barty and Evan, who were very interesting characters. He thought that one's friend said a lot about a person, at least in his case. His friends had made him who he was essentially. And you aren't excited? That's not what I said, Regulus stated simply. Well, we're almost there. Right, he said with mock enthusiasm, already slipping back towards the room. James just sat there, feeling dumb for not saying anything. He hadn't known what to say. Apparently, Regulus made him speechless. Of course, Peter found this hilarious and didn't stop laughing until Remus woke up. As discreetly as he could, James put the notebook back in his bag and hoped Peter would forget about it for now. They were staying in Tampa overnight in a hotel, which meant James would have a place where he could hopefully record a demo with his acoustic alone. Of course, he knew he was going to have to show it to everyone at some point, especially if he was submitting it to Mary. They all need to agree on it, and he had to give them the opportunity to work on it if they wanted to, or at least give their opinions. Before everything, the marauders were friends. After that, they were a democracy. Peter didn't bring anything up again until they were walking to breakfast. They had found a place half a mile away from the venue and where they parked their bus. Look, I won't say anything yet, but you gotta show them eventually, Peter said. Thankfully, he was only talking about the song. Yeah, yeah. Thanks, Pete, James said. Hmm. Now, on to better things, he said, his voice trailing off. He didn't even need to finish his sentence. James could tell he was talking about Regulus, if not made that much more obvious when he gestured to him. He was a couple of yards ahead of them, walking with Barty and Evan. Honestly, they probably never would have invited them had it not been for Regulus knowing them, but James was finding that he actually liked them, even if he had taken to calling them Thing 1 and Thing 2. We are not discussing that. We totally are. Peter, James. Okay, so maybe James was dying to tell someone. He had been keeping it to himself ever since he met Regulus, because let's face it, he's gorgeous. James knew that right away, but it was developing way too quickly. Regulus hated him. And while James was actively trying to change that opinion, he did not need to go falling in love with someone who wanted nothing to do with him. He missed his chance though, because Sirius dropped back a little bit and wrapped an arm around James's shoulder, telling him he was being slow. Doesn't matter anyway, James defended. We're here. Trying to figure out where to sit was difficult. Did he distance himself from Regulus, or did he try to get closer? He didn't know which was worse. The decision was made for him, and he ended up next to Sirius and on the exact opposite end that Regulus was on. Peter was directly across from him, being as annoying and obnoxious as possible, but he was getting away with it because Sirius and Remus were too occupied with playing footy under the table and pretending like they were doing absolutely nothing. Still, even if his mind was occupied with other things, James enjoyed the company of all of his friends in one place. Really, all they were missing was Mary, and she was planning on coming to visit soon. Or so she said anyway. Lily, no, Remus said, cutting off her sentence. She was asking about the song that they hadn't performed in ages, and they all basically refused to. What? Why not? She said with a small pot. We hate that song. But it's so good. What song? Sirius asked, turning back into the conversation. Lily smiled. Heartbreak Girl. The reaction Sirius had to the song was visceral. He actually physically jumped a little bit. Absolutely not. It was from the first album that they had put out, and safe to say they weren't exactly proud of it. It was one of those songs they had written because they had to, not because they wanted to. Sirius was the one who wrote it too, which made it all the better when Really started singing. I dedicate this song to you, the one who never sees the truth, that I can take away your hurt, heartbreak girl, she sang loudly. Sirius started throwing butter pots at her until she stopped, but she had already gotten the attention of the rest of the table. Was that Regulus trailed off, looking mostly at Sirius and having to lean across the table to see him properly. Shut up. What? James asked, ignoring the look Peter gave him. So maybe he had straightened his back a little bit at the sound of Regulus's voice. So what? Reggie, I will murder you, Sirius threatened. Regulus ignored him and faced James. Everyone else was quiet, waiting for the story as eagerly as James was, any opportunity to embarrass Sirius. It wasn't always called Heartbreak Girl, Regulus started, about to delve into the origin of the song. None of them had ever gotten it, just assuming it was something that Sirius had whipped up in no time so they would have enough for the album. Apparently not. In fact, it's not even about the girl. Sirius shot out of his chair so quickly, knocking into James as he made his way to Regulus. Regulus let himself be dragged away, flashing a quick grin and clearly very pleased with himself for causing trouble. This now begged the question of who the song was about. Originally, he thought it wasn't about anyone, mostly because Sirius wasn't interested in women, and also he had never mentioned anything to James about the guy. What the hell was that? Peter asked, breaking the silence. James looked at Remus to see if he maybe had an answer, but he was pointedly not looking at anyone. He had never considered the idea that maybe their story went back even further than James had thought. If this was the reaction to a song they had released almost 6 years ago. Barty and Evan came with him. In fact, it was Barty who ended up driving them to the airport. He had dreams of renting a red convertible, and that was exactly what he did. They had never met Dorca, but they knew Pandora apparently. He supposed it wasn't unheard of, but he at least thought they would have mentioned it. Regulus sat in the back, sunglasses over his eyes and his phone in his hand. He tried to be present and in the moment, but it was impossible to talk to either of them over the sound of the wind, and he had just spent the past 15 minutes looking out the window. His time left on the tour was technically finishing up. He was only supposed to stay for a week to make Sirius happy, which was working other than today. He had practically yelled at Regulus like he was still a child, which in this case he only found amusing. Apparently, his teenage crush on Remus was still a secret, and Regulus had only found out from snooping through his diary. He would never do that now, but Sirius had sort of started to drift away, and at that time it had been the only way for him to know what was going on in his life. It was a bit hypocritical because he would absolutely, without hesitation, murder Sirius if he ever did the same thing to him. Evan turned around in his seat and hit Regulus on the thigh as hard as he could. His blond hair was floppy and flying everywhere, but he was smiling. What the fuck was that for? But he was coming to a stop at a red light and had just turned the music down, so he didn't need to yell. We were talking to you. Oh, okay. Evan rolled his eyes. We need to take you shopping. For what? You've only got like 3 shirts? I'm leaving soon, he reminded them. He was on his fifth day, which was weird to think about because he felt like he had already been there forever. But still, it meant just the Tampa show tonight and then the Jacksonville show on his last night, and he was home free. He pointedly decided to not think about how that made him feel. Evan sighed deeply and turned around as the light turned green, which meant the conversation was paused for another couple of minutes. He really only did have a couple articles of clothing and his ballet stuff that he had left untouched. Once the speed limit changed to much lower, Regulus knew they were close to the airport. Doka and Pandora had made it easy and traveled together, although it had taken them almost an hour to choose a time that worked well for both of them. Just one outfit, Bertie said. Maybe two. For what? For the shows, idiot. Don't you want to look hot? Not particularly. Barty smiled at him through the rearview mirror. But don't you want to look good for Jamie? No, I don't, Regulus said, almost pouting about it. He didn't care about how he looked for James. It didn't matter to him, one way or the other. He's blushing, Evan reported after turning around. I hope you crashed the car. Pandora and Dorca were waiting at the doors with nothing more than a small carry-on. They were only here for a short trip anyway. They were dressed like they were ready for the beach or the warm weather. Pandora was wearing a loose short blue sundress, the straps tied around her neck, and it fell to just above her knees. She had cut her hair since the last time Regulus had seen her, which really was only a couple of days ago, but it fell to just above her shoulders and was still the bleach blonde color she was born with. Dorca was wearing a long white skirt and an orange tank top that only she could pull off. It was bright and neon, but it contrasted beautifully against her skin. She had dyed her hair red and had chopped most of it, leaving her curls natural instead of the braids she normally wore. You're late, Dorca said, looking at Regulus first. He rolled his eyes, hopping out of the car to greet them, while Barty and Evan did the same thing. Blame Barty, he said, gesturing to where he was holding his hand out for her to shake. Pandora was sort of just staring at Regulus's arm like she couldn't believe it. Honestly, he was starting to get used to only using his right hand for everything, even if it was a pain to even function normally. Shit, she said, looking up to see Regulus. Hey, love. Hi. You really broke it, huh? No, I just wear the cast for fun. Pandora rolled her eyes and pulled out a sharpie from her bag. He wouldn't have been surprised if she had only brought it with for the exact reason. He hadn't let anybody sign the cast. He thought it was a stupid practice that didn't make any sense. But he couldn't say no to Pandora. So he let her sign her name with a small heart. And then he had to let Dorca sign it. And she underlined her name dramatically. And then Barty and Evan wanted to sign it too. And this was the exact reason he hadn't let anybody do this. When he left the airport, there were four signatures on his cast, and he was powerless to stop it. They didn't even stop at the hotel, and apparently Dorca and Pandora were already caught up on the plan, which was, for some reason, to make Regulus look like a slut. He just let that happen too, trying on the clothes that Barty was throwing at him and adding the makeup that Pandora insisted he needed to his cut. Eventually, they settled on an outfit that Regulus was apparently going to be wearing to the show. A white tank top, one that Dorca has scrunched up and declared she would be cropping, and a pair of loose dark wash jeans. It was the most basic outfit he could have imagined, and it cost way more than what it was worth. But he did look good. You'll let me do your hair, right? Dorca asked, looking at his mess of curls with a very clean disapproval. To be fair, it was hard to maintain good hair on a tour bus. Barty and Evan had to be at the venue early, and the girls wanted to meet everyone beforehand anyway, so all five of them went to where they were still sound checking. Regulus had changed back into his regular clothes, not wanting to deal with them yet. There was also a bunch of new jewelry and makeup in the bags in the car, so they were really going all out. The first people that Regulus saw were Marlene and Emmeline, who were just sort of walking around. Pandora and Dorca wanted the whole rounds, so he figured they were a safe spot to start. Of course, he should have expected for Marlene and Dorca to hit it off, even if they were trying to hide the fact that they were practically undressing each other with their eyes. Regulus was going to be hearing about this for ages. So, you're a singer? Dorca asked. Marlene leaned against the wall. Among other things, yes. Emmeline shared a tiny look with Regulus, and even if they didn't know each other very well, anybody could see exactly what was going on. Are you guys watching the show tonight? Marlene asked. She might have technically addressed the whole group, but she was only looking at Dorca. Yeah, we'll be in the crowd, Dorca told her. Stopping at Marlene first was clearly a very bad idea, and they ended up talking to her for almost 5 minutes before Regulus decided he had to put an end to it. Regulus Black, Dorca whispered to him as they walked away. Why didn't you tell me about her? Because I don't like women, Dorca. Still, you could have told me there were beautiful people here. Regulus stopped. There's me, he pointed out. His looks were something he constantly had to worry about, and plenty of people had complimented him before. So yeah, Regulus knew he was technically a very good-looking person. It didn't mean anything, and it especially didn't mean he liked himself. What's her last name? Lorca asked, pulling out her phone and pulling up Instagram. Regulus took it from her. We have more people to meet first. She shook her head. No thanks, I'm done. Don't you want to see Sirius? As if on cue, Sirius walked out of the bathroom and did a double take when he saw the three of them. He had never met either of them before, but he knew that they existed, and he was well aware that they were coming. Oh my god, Dorca Meadows and Pandora Winter? He asked, bowing dramatically in front of them. They loved the attention too, playing into the theatrics just as much. Regulus knew this would happen when they all met, and maybe he had been putting it off, wanting to keep his friends to himself. Everyone always loved Sirius more. Sirius Black, as I live and breathe, Pandora said, grabbing his hand and giving it a soft kiss. He smiled. Lovely to meet you both. Come meet the rest of the band. Regulus followed behind them, making it a point to not pout. Sirius was just charismatic, and people were attracted to that. At the end of the day, they were still his friends, and he had long gotten over his jealousy issues. James, Peter, and Remus were sitting on a couch, with a gap that Sirius had been sitting in before. Peter and James were playing a video game, and Remus was just watching quietly, going on his phone when he got bored. Boys, meet Dorca and Pandora, Sirius said loudly, giving their introductions. Hello. Hi. Peter only waved, too distracted by the game. Regulus stepped forward a little bit to see what they were playing, and he wasn't sure whether he should have been surprised that it was Mario Kart. Do you guys want to play? James asked, eyes flicking over to Regulus every couple of seconds, which was causing him to lose the game. Pandora volunteered immediately, taking a spot in between James and Peter and waiting for them to finish the round. Regulus had to physically keep Dorca from bothering Marlene since she was busy with soundcheck, so they also stayed. Regulus was used to watching people play video games. It was just a younger sibling thing, he was sure. He used to always watch Sirius play all the time when they were younger, and he never cared much to actually play himself. Dorca and Pandora played a round, and Pandora won. She was sneakily good at video games, literally every single one. Anybody that knew her also knew that she never lost. Dorca was competitive though, and so they played again until she won. Reg, wanna play? James asked him, holding out one of the remotes. Regulus was good at a lot of things. And he wasn't even being self aggrandizing, it was just the truth. However, Regulus was not good at video games. He never played them, he never had time to play them either. He does, Dorca said, grabbing it for him. That was how Regulus ended up spending an hour playing Mario Kart. He played a couple of rounds against James, determined to beat him, and he was pretty sure that James had let him win the last one, and from there he was hooked. It was instant gratification, all of the flashing lights and sound effects. He knew exactly how people got addicted to things like this, and he was fully prepared to spend the rest of his night like this. But they had to get ready for the show. It was supposed to be a good one.